wagon wheels creaked through the dust as Penelope Harper watched her brother pocket the gold coins, his eyes refusing to meet hers as he turned away without so much as a farewell. The year was 1879, and Marysville, California had become nothing more than a fading memory behind her as the stranger who now owned her snapped the reins harder than necessary. Penelope sat rigid in the back of the wagon, her hands bound loosely with rope, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had known Thomas was desperate, had seen the hollow look in his eyes when their parents died 6 months ago, leaving them with nothing but debts and a crumbling shack on the edge of town. But she never imagined he would do this. Never imagined her own blood would sell her like livestock to a man whose eyes were as cold as January frost. The man driving the wagon was named Silas Cormack, and everything about him made her skin crawl. He was perhaps 40 years old, with greasy hair that hung past his collar and a smell that suggested he had not bathed in weeks. When he smiled, which he did too often while looking at her, she could see several teeth were missing. He had not told her where they were going, but she had overheard him talking to Thomas, mentioning something about a place near the Nevada border where men paid good money for women who could work in the saloons and do other things he did not specify, but that made Thomas look away in shame. They had been traveling for 3 hours now, heading northeast on a road that grew increasingly desolate. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Penelope's throat was parched, but she refused to ask Silas for anything. She was 19 years old, and until this morning she had believed her life might still hold some promise. She had been teaching reading to some of the younger children in Marysville, earning just enough to help Thomas with expenses. She had even caught the eye of the baker's son, a kind young man who had started finding excuses to walk past the schoolhouse. That life seemed like a dream now, something that had belonged to a different girl entirely. The road curved through a stretch of scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and sagebrush. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose like ancient guardians, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in their shadows. Penelope tried to think, tried to plan some way to escape, but her mind kept returning to the look on Thomas's face when Silas had first approached them 3 days ago. Her brother had been 22, old enough to be responsible, old enough to find work and keep them fed. But he had fallen in with gamblers and drinkers, and when the debts piled up, when the men he owed started making threats, he had chosen the coward's way out. Silas started humming tunelessly, and the sound grated on Penelope's nerves. She focused instead on the landscape, on memorizing landmarks in case she got a chance to run. A lightning-struck tree, a cluster of red rocks, a dry creek bed. But where would she run to? They were miles from Marysville now, and the next town was who knew how far ahead. They crested a small rise, and Silas suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. Penelope's heart leaped, thinking perhaps he had changed his mind. But then she saw what had caught his attention. Another wagon was approaching from the opposite direction, still perhaps a quarter-mile away, moving at a steady pace. Silas cursed under his breath and glanced back at her. His expression had changed, become calculating and mean. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a blanket, dirty and moth-eaten, and threw it over her. The wool was heavy and smelled of horse sweat and mildew. "You keep quiet under there," he hissed. "You make a sound, and I will make you regret it. You understand me?" Penelope did not respond, but her mind was suddenly racing. Someone was coming, another traveler. If she could just make enough noise, attract their attention. But what if they did not care? What if they were friends of Silas? What if interfering only made things worse? She heard the other wagon growing closer, heard the jingle of harness and the steady clopping of hooves. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain Silas could hear it. The blanket was stifling in the heat, and sweat trickled down her back. She tried to breathe slowly, quietly, as she listened to the sound of the approaching wagon. Then it stopped, close enough that she could hear someone dismounting. "Afternoon," came a new voice, deep and measured, with a slight drawl that marked the speaker as someone from Texas or perhaps further south. "Hot day for traveling." "That it is," Silas replied. and Penelope could hear the false friendliness in his tone. "Just heading up to Auburn to visit family." "Auburn," the stranger said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he did not believe Silas at all. "That is a fair distance. You traveling alone?" There was a pause, a beat too long. "Just me and my cargo," Silas said. "Cargo," the stranger repeated. "What kind of cargo travels under a blanket in this heat?" Penelope's breath caught. She could feel the tension building like thunderclouds before a storm. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. She sucked in a deep breath and screamed as loud as she could, thrashing against the blanket. "Help! Please help me. I have been kidnapped." Everything happened at once. Silas cursed and lunged toward her. But suddenly there was a commotion, the sound of boots hitting dirt, and then Silas cried out in pain. The blanket was yanked off her, and Penelope blinked in the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting to see a tall man standing beside the wagon. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He wore dusty traveling clothes, a worn leather vest, and a gun belt that looked well used but carefully maintained. His hand rested on the handle of his revolver, and he was looking at Silas, who had tumbled off the wagon and was now sitting in the dirt, holding his jaw. "Now," the stranger said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "you want to explain to me why you have a young woman tied up in the back of your wagon?" "She is my wife," Silas sputtered, stumbling to his feet. "We had a disagreement, that is all. She is upset. Women get emotional." "I am not his wife," Penelope said quickly, her voice hoarse from screaming. "My brother sold me to him. He is taking me somewhere against my will. Please, you have to help me." The stranger's eyes flickered to her bound wrists, then back to Silas. His expression had gone cold. "I am going to give you one chance to walk away from this," he said quietly. "You get on that wagon, you turn it around, and you head back to wherever you came from. And you thank whatever God you believe in that I am in a charitable mood today." Silas's face twisted with anger and greed. "You cannot just take what is mine. I paid good money for her." The words hung in the air like poison. The stranger went very still, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, which somehow made it more frightening. "You paid money for a human being." It was a fair transaction, Silas insisted, but he was backing toward the wagon, his hand moving slowly toward something, perhaps a weapon hidden beneath the seat. "Do not," the stranger said, and his hand moved faster than Penelope could follow, drawing his revolver and cocking it in one smooth motion. "Do not make me do something that will haunt me, even if you deserve it." Silas froze, his hand halfway to whatever he had been reaching for. For a long moment the two men stared at each other, and Penelope hardly dared to breathe. Then Silas slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The men I work for, they do not forget things like this." "Then they can come find me," the stranger replied. "My name is Owen Dalton, and I ranch about 15 miles west of here. They want to discuss this transaction. They know where to look." He gestured with the gun. "Now get down from that wagon, slowly." Silas climbed down, his movements jerky with suppressed rage. Owen kept the gun trained on him while reaching up with his other hand to help Penelope down. His hand was warm and calloused, strong but gentle as he steadied her. Up close, she could see he had a scar along his jawline, and his eyes held a weariness that suggested he had seen more of the world's ugliness than any young man should. "Turn out your pockets," Owen said to Silas. "What?" "You heard me. Empty your pockets, all of them." Silas glared but complied, pulling out a dirty handkerchief, some loose tobacco, and a small leather pouch that clinked when it hit the ground. Owen gestured toward it with the gun. "That the money you paid?" When Silas did not answer, Owen looked at Penelope. "Your brother, what is his name?" "Thomas Harper," she said quietly. And what did this piece of filth pay him? She shook her head. I do not know. I did not see. Owen studied Silas for a long moment, then said, Pick up that pouch. Silas bent slowly and retrieved it. Now open it and show me what is inside. Silas's hands shook with anger as he loosened the drawstring and turned the pouch upside down. Gold coins tumbled into his palm, 5 of them, each glinting in the sunlight. $20 gold pieces. $100 total. The price of a human life, apparently. Something cold settled in Penelope's stomach. That was all Thomas had gotten for her, $100. Enough to pay off his gambling debts and maybe have a little left over for whiskey. Put them on the ground, Owen said, then take off your boots. My boots? Silas looked incredulous. You are going to walk back to wherever you came from. And you are going to do it in your socks. That way I know you will not be following us anytime soon. Also empties your pockets better. Men like you always keep an ace hidden. Silas opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. When Owen's finger rested a little more deliberately on the trigger, he sat down in the dirt and yanked off his boots, revealing socks so filthy they might have once been white but were now a mottled gray-brown. Now start walking, Owen said. In this heat, on this road, I will die out here. Maybe. Or maybe you will make it back to civilization and rethink your life choices. Either way, you are done with this business. Silas looked at Penelope one last time, and the hatred in his eyes made her step closer to Owen instinctively. Then he turned and began walking back down the road, his gait awkward without boots, his arms swinging in angry arcs at his sides. Owen watched him for a full minute, until the figure had shrunk considerably in the distance before he finally holstered his gun and turned to Penelope. His expression softened, and she saw kindness there beneath the weariness. Let me get those ropes off you, he said, pulling a knife from his belt. The blade was sharp and made quick work of the bindings. Penelope rubbed her wrists where the rope had left red marks, and Owen frowned at the sight. Did he hurt you? He asked her. Beyond this? She shook her head. No. We were only traveling for a few hours. He did not touch me. She paused. But I heard what he said to my brother, where he was taking me. What would have happened when we got there? Owen's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You are safe now. That man will not trouble you again. You do not know that, Penelope said, and she was alarmed to hear her voice breaking. He said he works for people. They might come looking for you. Let them come, Owen said simply. He bent and scooped up the gold coins from where Silas had dropped them, then held them out to her. This belongs to you. It is poor compensation for what your brother did, but it is something. Penelope stared at the coins in his palm. I cannot take that. Yes, you can. I have no use for money gained that way, and you are going to need it. For what? For whatever you decide to do next, Owen said. He tilted his head, studying her. You said you are from Marysville? You want me to take you back there? The thought of returning to that town, of facing Thomas and the neighbors who would ask questions she did not want to answer, made Penelope feel sick. No, she said quickly, I cannot go back there. I have nothing to go back to. Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, I have a ranch, like I told that bastard. It is not much, just a small spread with cattle and horses. But I have a housekeeper, a woman named Maria, who has been with me since my father died 2 years ago. She is kind, and she could use help with the work. If you want, you could come there, just until you figure out what you want to do next. Penelope looked at him carefully. He seemed sincere, and everything about his demeanor suggested he was trustworthy. But she had trusted Thomas too, had believed her brother would protect her. How could she trust her judgment now? Owen seemed to read her thoughts. I understand if you would rather I take you to the nearest town. Auburn is about 20 miles northeast. There is a boarding house there run by a widow woman. I could give you enough money to stay there for a few weeks while you look for work. That was generous. More generous than Penelope had any right to expect from a stranger. But the thought of being alone in another unfamiliar town, of trying to explain her situation to suspicious strangers was almost as frightening as staying with Silas would have been. "If I went to your ranch," she said slowly, "I would work for my keep. I would not be a charity case." A small smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Maria would probably appreciate that. She is always complaining that the house is too big for one person to manage properly." "And you," Penelope said, needing to be clear, needing to protect herself, "you would not expect anything from me beyond honest work?" Owen's expression became serious again. "Miss Harper, I give you my word as a man and on my father's memory that you would be safe under my roof. I do not take advantage of women, and I do not tolerate anyone else doing so either. You would be an employee, nothing more, unless you decided otherwise of your own free will." There was something in the way he said it, a sincerity that Penelope found herself wanting to believe. And really, what choice did she have? She could take the money and try to make her way alone, but a young woman traveling by herself was vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand. At least at Owen's ranch, there would be another woman present. This Maria he mentioned? "All right," she said, "I will come to your ranch. Thank you." Owen nodded and walked over to where Silas's wagon still stood. He unhitched the horses, tied them to the back of his own wagon, then climbed up to check what else was in the vehicle. He returned a moment later with a canteen and a small bundle. "Here," he said, handing her the canteen. "Drink. You look like you need it." The water was warm and tasted slightly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Penelope had ever experienced. She drank deeply, feeling the liquid soothe her parched throat before handing it back. Owen had unwrapped the bundle and was examining the contents. Some dried beef, a loaf of bread that had seen better days, and an apple that was only slightly bruised. "We will leave the wagon here," he said. "Someone will find it eventually and claim it, I suppose, but we will take the horses. They are decent animals, and it is not their fault their owner was a piece of garbage." He helped Penelope up onto his wagon, which was much better maintained than Silas's had been, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they started moving, heading west now instead of north, Penelope looked back once at the abandoned wagon sitting in the road. Her old life, such as it was, had ended when Thomas made his choice. This was something new, something uncertain, but at least it was not the nightmare Silas had planned for her. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after they had been traveling in silence for a few minutes. Owen glanced at her, seeming surprised by the question, but not displeased. "It is called the Running D after my father, Daniel Dalton. He started it about 20 years ago, when this area was even wilder than it is now. It is about 300 acres, with a good creek running through it and enough grass to support 100 head of cattle. We also raise horses, which is really where my passion lies. My father loved cattle, but I always preferred horses. They have more personality." Despite everything, Penelope felt a small smile cross her face. "I have always liked horses too. My father had one, a chestnut mare named Penny. I used to help him brush her when I was little." "Penny for Penelope?" Owen asked. "Actually, I was named for the horse," Penelope admitted. "My mother said when she was pregnant with me that Mare was the calmest, gentlest creature, and she hoped I would turn out the same way. So when I was born, she gave me the same name." "Did you? Turn out the same way?" Penelope thought about it. "I suppose so, mostly. I'm not terribly exciting. I like reading and teaching and quiet things. My brother always said I was boring." "Your brother is a coward and a fool," Owen said bluntly, "and being kind and gentle is not the same as being boring. The world needs more gentle people, not fewer." They rode in companionable silence for a while after that. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The heat of the day was finally starting to break, and a slight breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. "How long have you been running the ranch alone?" Penelope asked eventually. 2 years, like I said. My father died of a fever that swept through the area. My mother died when I was young, maybe 10 years old. She was thrown from a horse and hit her head. It was just me and my father after that, until he passed. Maria was a friend of my mother's, and she came to help after my father died. I honestly do not know what I would have done without her. She kept the house running when I could barely function from grief. I am sorry, Penelope said softly. About your parents. Thank you. And I am sorry about yours. I assume they are gone too, if your brother was making decisions about your future. They died 6 months ago, cholera. It went through Marysville last fall, and they both caught it. Thomas and I were lucky, I suppose. We were sick, but we recovered. They did not. Owen was quiet, and Penelope appreciated that he did not offer empty platitudes about how they were in a better place, or how it was God's will. Those kinds of comments, well-meaning as they might be, had made her want to scream in the weeks after her parents died. It must have been hard, he said finally, losing them, and then having your brother betray you like that. I keep thinking there must have been signs, Penelope said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Ways I should have known he was capable of something like this, but he just seemed lost and sad after they died. He started drinking more, gambling more, but I thought it was grief. I thought he would come out of it eventually. That is not your failure, Owen said firmly. What he did is on him, not you. You could not have prevented it by being more watchful or more understanding. He made his choice. Penelope felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them away furiously. She had cried enough over the past 6 months. She did not want to fall apart in front of this kind stranger who had already done so much for her. As if sensing her distress, Owen changed the subject. Maria is going to have about 1,000 questions when we arrive. She is protective of me even though she is about half my size. She will probably interrogate you to make sure you are not some kind of criminal I have picked up. And what will you tell her? The truth, that I ran into a woman who needed help, and I offered her work. Maria might be nosy, but she is good-hearted. Once she understands the situation, she'll be glad to have you there. They talked more as the miles passed, small things that helped Penelope learn more about the man who had saved her. Owen had been raised on the ranch, had never traveled much beyond the local towns. He had spent 1 year in San Francisco when he was 20, learning about horse breeding from a famous trainer, but had quickly grown tired of city life and returned home. He liked his life, he said, even though it was hard and sometimes lonely. He liked the honesty of working with animals, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Penelope told him about her work teaching children, about the little schoolhouse in Marysville where she had spent her days. She told him about her favorite students, about the shy little girl who had finally learned to read after months of struggle, about the boy who had a gift for mathematics that Penelope tried to nurture even when his family needed him to work their farm. You will be able to teach again, Owen said. Once you are settled, once you have figured out what you want, there are always families looking for someone to teach their children. Penelope hoped he was right, but it was hard to imagine a future right now when the present was still so uncertain and strange. The sun had fully set by the time they reached the ranch, leaving only the deep purple twilight that preceded full darkness. Penelope could make out shapes in the dimness. A main house that looked sturdy and well-maintained, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fences that marked off pastures. As they approached, a dog began barking, and a moment later, a woman emerged from the house carrying a lantern. "Owen Dalton, you are late!" the woman called, her accent marking her as Spanish or perhaps Mexican. "I was beginning to worry that you had gotten yourself killed on the road." "Sorry, Maria," Owen called back. "I ran into some trouble. Or rather, I stopped some trouble." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and Maria raised her lantern higher, illuminating Penelope for the first time. The woman was perhaps 50, with silver threading through her black hair, and a face that was weathered but kind. Her expression went from curious to concerned in an instant. "Owen, who is this?" "This is Miss Penelope Harper," Owen said, climbing down from the wagon and then turning to help Penelope down. "She needs a place to stay for a while, and I thought she might be able to help you with the housework. Penelope, this is Maria Ruiz, who runs this place better than I ever could." Maria set the lantern down and came closer, looking Penelope up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She saw the rope marks on Penelope's wrists, the dusty state of her dress, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. Inside, Maria said firmly. Both of you. We will talk inside, and I will make tea, and you will tell me what happened. The house was warm and welcoming, with well-worn furniture that looked comfortable and windows dressed with curtains that Maria had clearly made herself. The kitchen was large, with a cast-iron stove that radiated heat and shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and fruits. Maria sat them both at a wooden table and busied herself making tea while Owen told her what had happened on the road. Maria's face grew darker with anger as the story progressed, and when Owen finished, she turned to Penelope with an expression of such fierce compassion that Penelope felt the tears she had been holding back finally begin to fall. "Your brother should be ashamed," Maria said, taking Penelope's hands in her own. "What he did is unforgivable. But you are safe now, you understand? You are safe here, and no one will hurt you while I have breath in my body." Penelope could only nod, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Maria made her drink the hot tea, which was sweet and fragrant with herbs, and then insisted on showing her to a bedroom on the second floor. It was small but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in a quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the darkened pastures. "You sleep now," Maria said. "Tomorrow we will talk about work and plans and all the practical things. Tonight you need to rest." After Maria left, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, her hands wrapped around the teacup Maria had insisted she bring upstairs. She could hear low voices below, Owen and Maria talking, but could not make out the words. She looked around the room, at this space that was hers at least for tonight, and tried to process everything that had happened since she woke up this morning. This morning she had still been in Marysville, had still believed her brother would take care of her. This afternoon she had been tied up in a wagon, being taken to a fate worse than death. And tonight she was here, in a stranger's house, being offered safety and work and kindness she did not know how to accept. She finished the tea and set the cup on the washstand, then went to the window. The moon had risen, nearly full, and in its light she could see the shapes of horses in a nearby pasture. They stood together in a loose group, their heads lowered peacefully as they grazed. There was something soothing about the sight, something that made the tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosen just slightly. Maybe, she thought, maybe this would be all right. Maybe she had gotten lucky when Owen Dalton decided to stop and investigate that wagon. Maybe, against all odds, she had been given a second chance at something resembling a normal life. She undressed down to her chemise and climbed into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in months, and despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion pulled her down into sleep within minutes. Penelope woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then the memories of yesterday came flooding back. She sat up, pushing her hair out of her face, and looked around the room. Everything from last night was still here, still real. She had not dreamed it. There was a soft knock on the door, and Maria's voice called, "Miss Harper, are you awake?" "Yes," Penelope called back. "Come in." Maria entered carrying a bundle of cloth. "I brought you some clean clothes. They belong to Owen's mother. He said you could have anything you wanted from her things. We're about the same size, I think, you and she." The clothes were simple but well made. A cotton dress in a soft blue color, a white blouse, a split riding skirt, and various undergarments. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes again at the generosity. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I do not know how to repay you." "You repay us by accepting help when it is offered," Maria said firmly. "Now get dressed and come down for breakfast. We have much to discuss." Penelope washed her face in the basin, braided her dark blonde hair, and put on the blue dress. It fit reasonably well, perhaps a bit loose in some places, but nothing that could not be fixed with a few stitches. When she looked at herself in the small mirror over the washstand, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Yesterday she had been frightened and helpless. Today she looked almost normal, like someone who belonged in this house. Downstairs, Owen was already at the table, eating breakfast while reviewing some papers. He looked up when she entered and stood politely until she sat down. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Penelope admitted. "Thank you again for everything you have done. I know I said it yesterday, but I need you to know how grateful I am." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Owen said. "Any decent person would have done the same thing." Maria snorted as she set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Penelope. Any decent person would like to think so, but most people do not stop to help. They tell themselves it is not their business, or that they might get hurt, or any number of excuses. "You did a good thing, Owen." Owen looked uncomfortable with the praise and changed the subject. "Maria and I were discussing what your responsibilities might be here. Maria does most of the cooking and house management, but there's plenty of other work. Laundry, mending, maintaining the vegetable garden, preserving food for winter, helping with the chickens, and if you are comfortable around horses, we can always use help in the stables. The ranch hands come by every day to tend the cattle, but I manage the horses myself mostly." "I can do all of those things," Penelope said quickly, "and I would like to learn about the horses, if you are willing to teach me." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or interest. "I would be happy to. After breakfast, I will show you around the property." They ate together, Maria fussing over both of them and piling more food on their plates than either could possibly eat. Afterward, Owen led Penelope outside into the bright morning sunshine. In the daylight, she could see the ranch properly for the first time. The main house was painted white with green trim surrounded by flower beds that showed Maria's careful attention. The barn was huge, red painted and solid, with a hay loft and multiple stalls. Beyond that were the pastures, several of them separated by sturdy fences and dotted with cattle and horses. "We have about 80 head of cattle right now," Owen explained as they walked. "They are hardy stock, bred to handle the heat and the sometimes sparse grazing. But the horses are what I really care about." He gestured toward a pasture where a dozen horses grazed peacefully. "I breed them for endurance and intelligence. Good ranch horses that can work cattle, but also be trusted around families. A horse with a bad temper might be useful in some situations, but I prefer animals that are reliable and kind." "They are beautiful," Penelope said, watching the way the sunlight gleamed on their coats, the graceful way they moved. "Want to meet them up close?" Owen led her to the fence and whistled softly. Several of the horses raised their heads, and one, a gray mare with intelligent eyes, walked over to investigate. Owen pulled something from his pocket, a chunk of apple, and offered it to the mare on his flat palm. She lipped it up gently, then nuzzled his shoulder. "This is Silver," Owen said. "She is one of my favorites, smart as a whip and gentle as a lamb. She just foaled last month. Her baby is that little one over there, the dark one." Penelope looked where he pointed and saw a gangly foal with legs that seemed too long for its body, staying close to another mare. "Will you keep the foal or sell it?" "Probably keep this one. She has good bloodlines, and I want to build up my breeding stock. Eventually, I hope to have the running D known for the best horses in Northern California." They spent the morning walking the property, Owen showing her everything and explaining how the ranch operated. He had 2 regular hands who came daily to help with the cattle and the heavier work, but he did most of the horse training himself. Maria managed the house and the chickens and kept everyone fed. It was a small operation, but it ran smoothly, and Penelope could see that Owen took pride in every aspect of it. By midday, Penelope's head was swimming with information, but she felt energized rather than overwhelmed. There was something appealing about the simplicity and honesty of this life. Everyone had their role, their responsibilities, and there was satisfaction in completing tasks and seeing tangible results. Over the next few weeks, Penelope settled into a routine. She rose early to help Maria with breakfast, then spent her mornings working in the vegetable garden or doing laundry. Afternoons were often devoted to mending clothes or preserving food. And in the evenings, after dinner was cleaned up, Owen would take her to the stables and teach her about horse care. She learned how to brush them properly, how to clean their hooves, how to check for injuries or signs of illness. Owen was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain things multiple times if she did not understand. And Penelope discovered that she loved working with the horses. They were gentle creatures, responsive and affectionate. And there was something deeply peaceful about standing in a stable with her hands on a horse's warm neck, listening to it breathe. Maria watched this growing interest with knowing eyes and occasionally exchanged glances with Owen that Penelope did not quite understand, but both of them seemed pleased that she was adapting so well to ranch life. One evening, about 3 weeks after Penelope arrived, she was in the stable with Owen, helping him tend to a young gelding who had cut his leg on some brush. Owen was cleaning the wound while Penelope held the horse's head, murmuring soft words to keep him calm. "You have a gift for this," Owen said, not looking up from his work. "The horses trust you. That is not something that can be taught." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "I enjoy it. More than I thought I would." "Have you given any thought to what you want to do long term?" Owen asked. His tone was casual, but Penelope sensed the question was important to him. "I mean, you are welcome to stay here as long as you want, but I imagine you have dreams beyond being a hired hand on a small ranch." Penelope was quiet, thinking about how to answer. The truth was she had been so focused on surviving day to day that she had not let herself think much about the future. But lately, as the immediate trauma of what had happened began to fade, she had started to wonder about what came next. "I thought I might want to go back to teaching," she said slowly, "but honestly, I'm not sure anymore. I am happy here. Happier than I have been in a long time, maybe ever. Is that strange?" Owen finished bandaging the gelding's leg and straightened, looking at her directly for the first time in the conversation. In the dim light of the stable, with dust motes floating in the air and the soft sounds of horses around them, he looked different somehow, younger, more vulnerable. "Younger. It is not strange at all," he said quietly. "I am glad you are happy here. I have been happy having you here too." Something in his tone made Penelope's heart skip. She looked at him more carefully, noticing things she had been too overwhelmed to see before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands when he worked with the animals, the way he always made sure she had enough to eat, enough rest, enough time to herself. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered to him. When had she started seeing him not just as her rescuer, not just as her employer, but as a man she was attracted to? A man she looked forward to seeing every morning? A man whose approval meant more to her than it probably should? The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She barely knew him, really. It had only been 3 weeks. And yet she knew important things about him, that he was kind and fair, that he worked hard and expected the same from others, that he loved his animals and his land with a fierce devotion, that he treated her with respect and never once made her feel lesser or vulnerable. Owen was still looking at her, and in his eyes she saw something that mirrored her own feelings: interest, attraction, hope maybe, mixed with uncertainty. "Penelope," he said, then stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. You have been through something terrible, and you are here as my employee, nothing more. But I would be lying if I said I did not enjoy your company beyond just the work you do. You are intelligent and kind, and talking with you has become the best part of my days." Penelope's breath caught. This was happening. He was saying these things, and she needed to decide how to respond. She could be cautious, could maintain the professional distance between them, or she could be honest. "It has become the best part of my days too," she said softly. "These evenings in the stable, working with the horses and talking with you, I look forward to them all day." Owen smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look boyish and happy. "Yeah? Yeah," she confirmed, smiling back. He took a step closer, then seemed to remember himself, and stopped. "I do not want to rush anything. You have every right to take all the time you need to figure out what you want." "I know," Penelope said, "and I appreciate that. But Owen, what happened with my brother and Silas, as terrible as it was, it led me here, to this place, to this life, to you. I am not saying I am glad it happened, but I am grateful for where I ended up." They stood there in the stable, not touching, but close enough that Penelope could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse beating in his throat. The moment stretched out, pregnant with possibility, and then Owen took another small step forward and slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent almost, and it sent shivers down her spine. "You are remarkable," he said. "The way you have handled everything, the strength you have shown, it is remarkable." "I do not feel very strong," Penelope admitted. "I feel like I'm barely holding myself together most of the time." "That is what strength is," Owen said. "Holding yourself together when everything has fallen apart. Moving forward even when you are scared. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." Before Penelope could respond, they heard Maria calling from the house, her voice carrying across the yard that dinner was ready. The spell broke, and they stepped apart, both of them suddenly self-conscious. "We should go," Owen said. "Maria gets cranky when her food gets cold." They walked back to the house together, not touching, but more aware of each other than ever before. Maria looked at them shrewdly when they entered, but did not comment, just served the meal, and kept up a stream of chatter about the chickens and the weather and the upcoming harvest. After that evening, something had shifted between Penelope and Owen. They were more careful around each other in some ways, more aware of the attraction growing between them. But they were also more open, more willing to share thoughts and feelings they might have kept hidden before. Owen told her about his mother, about how much he still missed her even after all these years, about how his father had never fully recovered from losing her, had thrown himself into building the ranch as a way to cope with the grief, about how Owen sometimes worried he was doing the same thing, using work to avoid facing his own loneliness. Penelope told him about her childhood, about parents who had been loving but poor, who had sacrificed so much to give their children opportunities they never had, about how betrayed she felt by Thomas, not just for what he did, but for all the times before when he had chosen his own pleasure over his family's needs, about her fear that she would never be able to trust anyone fully again. "You can trust me," Owen said when she confessed that fear. They were sitting on the porch one evening watching the sun set over the mountains. "I know that is easy to say and harder to prove, but I mean it. I will never betray you, Penelope, never." She believed him. Maybe that was foolish, maybe she was setting herself up for more hurt, but she believed him. And slowly, carefully, she began to let her guard down, began to let herself imagine a future that included him. Maria watched it all with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this coming from the start. One morning, while she and Penelope were kneading bread dough together, she said, "He is a good man, Owen. He deserves to be happy." "I know he is," Penelope said, not pretending to misunderstand. "And you? Are you happy?" Penelope thought about it, really thought about it. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I am, or at least I am starting to be." "Good," Maria said firmly. "You both deserve happiness. Do not let fear stop you from reaching for it." Summer deepened into fall, and the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. There was food to preserve, wood to chop and stack, fences to repair before the weather turned bad. Penelope worked alongside Owen and Maria and the ranch hands, learning new skills and feeling her body grow stronger from the physical labor. One afternoon in late September, Owen asked if she wanted to go riding with him to check on some cattle in the far pasture. Penelope agreed eagerly, pleased that he trusted her enough now to ride one of his horses. He saddled Silver for her and a big bay gelding named Thunder for himself, and they rode out across the ranch. It was a beautiful day, the air crisp with a hint of autumn, the sky a brilliant blue. The cattle were where they should be, healthy and content. And after checking on them, Owen suggested they ride a bit further to a spot he wanted to show her. They climbed a gentle rise, and when they reached the top, Penelope gasped. Spread out below them was a view that seemed to go on forever, rolling hills covered in grass turning gold with the season, clusters of oak trees, and in the distance, the purple shadows of the mountains. A creek cut through the landscape, glinting silver in the sunlight. "This is the western edge of my property," Owen said. "This is where I come when I need to think, when I need to remember why I do what I do." They dismounted and stood together looking out at the view. Penelope felt Owen's hand brush against hers, tentative, questioning. She responded by lacing her fingers through his, and she felt him relax beside her. "Penelope," he said, after a long moment of comfortable silence, "I need to tell you something." Her heart sped up. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen in love with you. I know it has not been that long, and I know you have been through so much, and I do not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated in any way. But I could not keep it to myself anymore. You should know how I feel." Penelope turned to face him fully, her hand still in his. She looked up at his face, at the vulnerability written there, at the hope and fear mingling in his expression. This man who had saved her, who had given her a home, who had treated her with kindness and respect even when he had no reason to. This man who made her laugh, who taught her patiently, who listened to her dreams and took them seriously. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, and watched joy spread across his face. "I did not think I could feel this way again, not after everything that happened, but you make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I have never experienced before." Owen lifted his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and perfect. The kiss was tender, full of promise rather than demand, and when they pulled apart, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They stood there together for a long time, holding each other and looking out at the vista before them, not needing to speak. The horses grazed peacefully nearby, and the wind whispered through the grass, and Penelope thought that this moment, this perfect moment, was worth every terrible thing she had endured to get here. As fall turned to winter, Owen and Penelope's relationship deepened. They were careful about propriety, aware that Maria was watching and that the ranch hands would gossip if they saw anything inappropriate. But they found moments together, riding out to check on the horses, working side by side in the stable, sitting by the fire in the evening while Maria knitted and pretended not to notice the way they looked at each other. Owen courted her properly, the way a woman should be courted. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding the range. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and praising her when she finally hit the target. He talked about his dreams for the ranch, for breeding the finest horses in the state, and he asked about her dreams too, listening seriously when she talked about maybe opening a small school on the ranch someday for the children of the area. In December, on Christmas Eve, Owen asked her to marry him. They were in the stable, which had become their place where they could talk privately without Maria hovering. He had clearly been nervous all day, fumbling with things and distracted during meals, and when he finally dropped to one knee, Penelope's eyes filled with happy tears. "I do not have a fancy ring yet," he said, holding up a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's. I will buy you something better when we go into town." "It is perfect," Penelope said, taking his hand and pulling him to his feet. "And yes, I will marry you. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. Maria cried happy tears when they told her, and insisted on throwing a small celebration despite the short notice. She invited the ranch hands and a few neighbors, and they had a party with food and music and dancing. Penelope danced with Owen, his arms around her waist, and thought about how much her life had changed in 6 months. From the lowest moment of her life to this, to being engaged to a man she loved, to having a home and a future, it felt like a miracle. They were married in February of 1880 in a small ceremony in Marysville. Penelope had debated whether to go back to that town, the place that held so many painful memories, but she realized she needed to. She needed to face Thomas, to show him that his betrayal had not destroyed her, that she had survived and even thrived. Thomas did not come to the wedding, but she had not expected him to. She heard through mutual acquaintances that he had left town shortly after selling her, that he had paid off his debts and then disappeared, perhaps ashamed of what he had done. Penelope found that she did not hate him, not anymore. She pitied him, and she hoped someday he would find a way to live with what he had done. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Penelope wore a white dress that Maria had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Owen wore his best suit, his hair freshly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. Maria stood with them as a witness, along with one of the ranch hands, and the ceremony was performed by the town pastor, an elderly man who had known Owen's parents. When Owen slipped the ring on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Penelope felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Maria had thoughtfully moved her things out of the house into a small cabin on the property that had been sitting empty. "You are married now," she said firmly when Owen protested. "You need privacy. I am old, not dead. I know how these things work." Married life suited them both. Penelope took over more of the house management, working alongside Maria, but also making the place feel more like her own. She sewed new curtains, planted more flowers in the spring, and started planning the small school she wanted to open eventually. Owen continued to work with his horses, and now Penelope worked beside him more often, learning the intricacies of training and breeding. She had a natural gift for it, and Owen relied on her judgment more and more when making decisions about which horses to keep and which to sell. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were hard times, lean months when the cattle prices were low, and they worried about making ends meet. There was a bad storm in their first spring that damaged part of the barn and required expensive repairs. And there was the lingering trauma from Penelope's past. Nightmares that sometimes woke her in the night. Moments when a stranger on the road made her heart race with fear. But through it all, Owen was there, steady and patient and loving. He held her when she had nightmares, reminded her that she was safe, that Silas was long gone and could not hurt her. He never made her feel weak for her fears, never suggested she should just get over it. He simply loved her through it day after day, until slowly the bad memories began to fade and the good ones took their place. In the fall of their first year of marriage, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She was going to be a mother. She was going to bring a child into this world, a child who would be loved and wanted and safe. The opposite of how she had felt that day in the wagon with Silas. Owen was overjoyed when she told him, picking her up and spinning her around despite her protests that he should be careful. "We are going to be parents, Renner," he kept saying, his face alight with happiness. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick for the first few months, unable to keep much food down. And as she grew larger, the physical discomfort increased. But Owen was attentive and caring, taking over more of her chores without complaint, making sure she rested and ate well. Maria fussed over her constantly, making special foods to tempt her appetite and knitting tiny clothes for the baby. In May of 1881, after a long and difficult labor attended by Maria and a doctor from town, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, after Owen's father. And when Owen held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Penelope thought her heart might burst from love. Being a mother was harder than Penelope had imagined, but also more rewarding. Little Daniel was a good baby, healthy and happy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Watching Owen with their son, seeing the gentleness and wonder in his face as he held Daniel or changed his diaper or walked the floor with him when he was fussy, made Penelope fall in love with her husband all over again. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Owen's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and people began coming from as far as Sacramento and San Francisco to buy his animals. The Running D became known for producing horses that were smart, reliable, and gentle, perfect for family ranches. Owen credited much of the success to Penelope's involvement, to her gentle way with the animals, and her keen eye for quality. When Daniel was 2, Penelope finally opened her small school. It was just one room attached to the house, but it was enough. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to the children of nearby ranches, about 10 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Owen built her a proper schoolhouse as a surprise for her birthday that year. A pretty little building with windows on 3 sides to let in plenty of light, and a small stove to keep it warm in winter. In the spring of 1884, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had blonde hair like her mother and Owen's warm brown eyes, and from the moment she was born, she was a daddy's girl. Owen was helpless against her charms, and Penelope often joked that Rose could convince him to do anything with just a smile. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch thrived. The children grew healthy and happy, and Penelope and Owen's love deepened with each passing year. They had their disagreements, of course, the normal friction of 2 people building a life together, but they had learned how to talk through problems, how to listen to each other, how to compromise and forgive. One evening in the summer of 1886, Penelope stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel, now 5, was helping Owen tend to the horses, his small hands mimicking his father's movements. Rose, 3, was sitting in the grass playing with the kittens that lived in the barn. Maria was inside preparing dinner, humming a song in Spanish. Penelope put her hand on her stomach, where a 3rd child was growing, due in the winter. They had not told the children yet, wanting to wait a bit longer, but Owen knew and was thrilled. He said their family was perfect, that they were blessed beyond measure. She thought about the girl she had been 7 years ago, tied up in a wagon and heading toward a nightmare. That girl had been so frightened, so certain her life was over. She had not been able to imagine a future, could not see past the immediate terror of her situation. And then Owen had stopped that wagon. Owen had saved her, had brought her home, had given her a life beyond anything she could have dreamed. He had loved her when she felt unlovable, had believed in her when she did not believe in herself. He had given her children and a home and a purpose. He had given her everything. She heard his footsteps behind her on the porch, felt his arms circle her waist and his chin rest on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, Rouge?" he asked softly. "About how lucky I am," she said. "About how one terrible day led to all of this." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think about that too sometimes. About what would have happened if I had taken a different road that day, or if I'd been in a hurry and not stopped. About all the ways we might never have met." "But we did meet," Penelope said, turning in his arms to face him. "You did stop. You did save me. And now we have all of this." She gestured at the ranch spread out before them, at their children playing in the golden evening light, at the life they had built together. Owen smiled and kissed her, sweet and lingering. "I love you," he said. "I thank God every day that I found you." "I love you too," Penelope said. "You are my home, Owen Dalton, you and the children and this place. You are everything I never knew I needed." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, they stood together on the porch, holding each other and watching their children play. The past, with all its pain and fear, had faded into memory. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Penelope's 3rd child, a boy they named James, was born in January of 1887 during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. He came fast before the doctor could arrive from town, and Maria delivered him with Owen's help. When Penelope held her new son, with her husband beside her and Maria fussing happily and her other children peeking through the doorway with wide eyes, she felt a completeness that she had never imagined possible. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did and showed early promise as a trainer. Rose was spirited and creative, always drawing pictures or making up elaborate stories that she would perform for anyone who would watch. James was the baby, sunny-tempered and affectionate, adored by his older siblings. The school Penelope ran grew to include nearly 20 students, and she had to hire a young assistant teacher to help her manage them all. Owen's horse breeding program became so successful that he was able to expand the ranch, buying another 100 acres adjacent to their property. Maria grew older but remained sharp and active, the beloved grandmother figure to all the children. In the summer of 1890, a stranger arrived at the ranch asking for Penelope. Owen was immediately wary, his protective instincts kicking in, but the stranger turned out to be a lawyer from San Francisco. He informed Penelope that Thomas Harper had died in a mining accident in Nevada, and that in his will, he had left everything he owned to his sister. It was not much, just a few $100s and a letter, but Penelope accepted both. She read the letter that evening, sitting on the porch with Owen beside her. Thomas's handwriting was shaky, and the words were full of regret and apology. He wrote that he had never forgiven himself for what he did, that the guilt had eaten at him every day since. He wrote that he did not expect her forgiveness, did not deserve it, but that he wanted her to know he was sorry. He had followed her life from a distance, had heard about her marriage and her children and her school, and he was glad she had found happiness despite what he had done to her. Penelope cried as she read it. Not from grief exactly, but from a complicated mix of emotions she could not fully articulate. Owen held her and let her cry, not offering platitudes or advice, just being there. "Do you forgive him?" he asked finally. Penelope thought about it for a long time. "I do not know," she said honestly. "What he did was unforgivable, but he was my brother, and he was broken by grief and addiction. I am sad for the person he could have been, for the life he threw away. Does that count as forgiveness?" "I think it counts as compassion," Owen said, "and that is more than he probably deserved." They used the money Thomas left to start a fund for children whose families could not afford school supplies. It seemed like the right thing to do, a way to take something born of pain and turn it into something good. As the century drew to a close, Penelope looked back on the decade with wonder. She was now 31 years old, a wife and mother and teacher and rancher. She was stronger than she had ever been, capable and confident in ways the frightened 19-year-old in that wagon could never have imagined. The Running D was now one of the most respected ranches in Northern California, known for its quality horses and fair dealing. Owen had achieved his dream of building something lasting, something he could pass on to his children. And Penelope had found purpose and meaning in teaching, in helping shape young minds, and giving children opportunities she had almost been denied. One evening in December of 1899, as the new century approached, the Dalton family gathered for dinner. Daniel was 18 now, tall and strong, and already managing much of the horse training himself. Rose was 16, beautiful and bright, helping her mother with the school and talking about becoming a teacher herself. James was 12, still young but showing signs of the man he would become. They ate Maria's excellent cooking and talked about the past year, about plans for the next, about what the new century might bring. After the children went to bed, Penelope and Owen sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. 20 years, Owen said softly. "It has been almost 20 years since that day I found you." "The best 20 years of my life," Penelope said. "Mine too," Owen agreed. He kissed the top of her head. "You know, I used to worry that I had taken advantage of the situation, that I had offered you a place here when you were too vulnerable to make a real choice. Did I ever tell you that?" Penelope lifted her head to look at him. "You never took advantage of anything. You saved me, Owen. You gave me choices when I had none. You gave me time and space to heal. You never pressured me or made me feel obligated. Everything that happened between us happened because we both wanted it." "I know that now," Owen said. "But in those early days, I questioned myself constantly. I fell in love with you so fast, and I was terrified that you only thought you loved me back because I had helped you." I loved you because you were good and kind and decent, Penelope said firmly. I loved you because you saw me as a person, not as property or a burden. I loved you because being with you felt like coming home. And I have loved you every day since, through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow. You are my heart, Owen Dalton. You always will be. They kissed, still as much in love as they had been on their wedding day, maybe more so because their love had been tested and proven strong. As the fire crackled and the house settled around them, Penelope thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become, about how the worst moment of her life had led to the best life she could have imagined. The years continued to unfold. Daniel married in 1902, a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the western edge of the Running D property. In 1904, Penelope became a grandmother for the first time, holding her grandson and marveling at how the cycle of life continued. Rose became a teacher just as she had planned, taking over more of the school responsibilities as Penelope grew older. James decided he wanted to study veterinary medicine, and Owen proudly supported his education. Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1905, at the age of 75. Her death hit the family hard, but they took comfort in knowing she had lived a full life surrounded by people who loved her. They buried her on the ranch, under an oak tree she had always loved, with a simple marker that read, Maria Ruiz, beloved friend and family. As Penelope entered her 40s and then her 50s, she slowed down some but never stopped working. She still taught a few classes at the school, though Rose managed most of it now. She still worked with the horses, though Daniel handled the training. She and Owen spent more time together, riding out to check on the ranch, sitting on the porch in the evenings, traveling occasionally to visit James in the city where he practiced veterinary medicine. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1910, Owen took Penelope back to the spot on the western rise where he had first told her he loved her. They were older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces, but the view was just as beautiful as it had been that day. I would do it all again, Owen said, holding her hand and looking out at the land they had built their life on. Every moment, every struggle, every joy, I would choose you every single time. And I would choose you, Penelope said. You gave me a life, Owen. You gave me everything. They stood there together as they had so many times before. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and true. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and in the distance they could hear the sound of their grandchildren playing at Daniel's house. Penelope thought about that day on the road, about Silas and the wagon, and the terror she had felt. She thought about Owen stopping, about his courage and kindness, about the choice he had made to help a stranger. One moment, one decision, had changed the course of her entire life. Thank you, she said softly, squeezing Owen's hand, for stopping that day, for seeing me, for loving me. Thank you for letting me, Owen replied, for taking a chance on a rancher you barely knew, for building this life with me. You are everything I never knew I needed, Penelope. You always have been. As the sun set over the Running D ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Owen and Penelope Dalton stood together, their love as strong as it had been 3 decades earlier. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and built a legacy. They had taken a moment of horror and transformed it into a lifetime of love. And as they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created, Penelope felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Her brother had sold her to a man heading nowhere good, but a cowboy had stopped them and taken her home. And in doing so, he had given her everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream. The rest of their lives unfolded with the gentle rhythm of two people who had found their place in the world. Owen continued to work with his beloved horses until age forced him to slow down, and even then he spent hours in the stable, supervising and offering advice to Daniel and the grandchildren who showed interest in the family business. Penelope kept teaching almost until she was 70, finally retiring when her eyes grew too tired to read the small print in the books. They grew old together, watching their children and grandchildren thrive, taking pride in the legacy they had built. The Running D Ranch remained in the family, passed from generation to generation, a testament to what Owen and Penelope had created together. When Owen died in 1925 at the age of 71, peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him, the entire community mourned. He had been respected and loved, known for his integrity and kindness, for the quality of his work and the loyalty he inspired in everyone who knew him. Penelope held his hand as he took his last breath and whispered that she would see him again, that this was not goodbye but only farewell for a little while. She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days and the cowboy who had saved her life, and then spent every day proving that her faith in him had been justified. She passed away in 1930, in the house Owen had built, in the bed they had shared for 50 years. Her last words were about him, about how he had been the great love of her life, about how grateful she was for every moment they had together. And when they buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, with half the county in attendance, everyone agreed that theirs had been a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness and courage, and choosing to do the right thing even when it was hard. The Running D Ranch continues to this day, still in the Dalton family, still known for producing excellent horses and for the integrity of its dealings. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the western rise, people say they can feel the presence of Owen and Penelope forever together, forever watching over the land and the family they loved so much. Their story became legend in that part of California, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder that even from the darkest moments can come the brightest light, that love can triumph over fear, and that one person's courage to do the right thing can change everything.